Hey Zonya, how are you?
I'm doing really well today, Richard. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for for agreeing to be interviewed. Excuse me.
Yeah,
Let's start off by you sharing who you are, your name and your role, please.
sure. My name is Zonya Hicks. I'm currently a managing director of schools. I was most recently an elementary school principal for a few years.
Nice. And I understand, Zonya, you have had quite a bit of a career within education. You've been a dean of students, you have been a principal, and now you're managing other
Yeah.
principals. I want to start off with the dean role. So I know a lot of you've been able to experience that role in different places, and
Mhm.
everywhere has a different way they utilize folks in this critical function. What are some ways you've seen the dean role go really well, and where have you seen it go wrong, or how have you
Yeah.
seen it go wrong?
So I've seen it go really well in spaces where we served as the primary support for scholars who needed a bit extra attention, who needed a point person in terms of building stronger relationships.
Hmm.
I've seen it go really well when we were the ones charged with building like teacher capacity and skill at building relationships with scholars. Um, that's when I've seen it most effective. I've seen it go all the way left and be terrible when you were seen as the person who came to like pick up the children who couldn't stay in class. I put my fingers up in quote symbols, right? Because there's this idea that like you have to earn being in this classroom and not that it's something that you're entitled to as a part of the school community.
Right. You mentioned building teacher capacity. How do you do that with respect to building relationships with students?
Yeah, I think it's twofold, right? I think there's a piece of actually building their tactical skills. Like, this is how you de escalate a child if a child were to become upset. This is how you can be intentional about relationship building. These are some of the tactics, these are some of the systems and routines you can put in place in your classroom that will help you build relationships. This is how you can be intentional about touch points, right? That's
Mm.
more so the adaptive side, I'm sorry, tactical side of it. The adaptive piece is a lot more challenging, right? Because it involves shifting teacher mindset and getting them to buy into the fact that this is actually part of their job.
Mm. Interesting.
It, mhm.
But why do you think they don't view it always as part of their jobs?
I think it really depends, right? I think one of the things that we don't always think about is the significant impact that one's own personal experience in schooling has on your beliefs about what school is supposed to look like,
Mm.
feel like, be like for children.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think we pay attention to that in the ways that we should. I also think that some people come into this work thinking that it is my job to like share knowledge and information with these empty vessels sitting in front of me. And I anything that's outside of that is not my job,
Mm.
right? And so if you are having a bad day, if you are upset, if you don't have the language to share your emotions and you're 5, it's not my job to do that. It is only my job to teach you how to read.
Mm. Interesting. And you have spent a lot of time, it's unfair because I know you outside of this context, but you spent a lot of time training both leaders and teachers in your career. And, one of the things that we've often seen in the scope of education is, you have your adult learners in front of you and you teach them the both adaptive and technical skills needed to serve their students at the highest of levels. But then you go to the buildings and it doesn't quite turn out the way you wanted. So what lessons have you learned about closing the training to execution gap that we often see in
Yeah,
adults?
I think the training is not enough, right? You have to get buy-in from the people who are physically in that building every day. You have to make sure that leaders have consistent systems for support, monitoring, ensuring that that expectations are being met. People need to be you. It is imperative that people are willing to defend the bar whenever it's not being met, both on an academic and social emotional level. And so the training is like but one part of
Right.
a really important complex plan to ensure that we're doing right by children,
Yeah, you
right?
mentioned this
So
bar. The bar changes, unfortunately, from place to place. And I think, as you mentioned before, the bar is often dictated by one's own personal views about schooling and their experiences within school systems themselves. How do you keep the bar high in places? Well, you're now a managing director. So, how do you keep the bar high across multiple schools?
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to having a really clear vision of excellence, right? As the managing director, and then being able to like effectively communicate that vision and get people to buy into that, right? Because in the same way that we talk about building excellent relationships with kids is an imperative part of like an effective classroom, my having really strong relationships with the principals that I manage is paramount. They have to respect me and believe that what I'm doing is in the best interest of children in order to buy into what I'm trying to sell them, right? What I'm trying to get them to be bought in about in
Yeah.
terms of what their schools need to look like.
Yeah. And those relationships, how do you develop those when folks are rightfully worried about, the state of their schools in all aspects, right? They're worried about their own capacity to, be proficient at this job, given all the challenges that folks have been facing recently. How do you keep them motivated? How do you build those relationships, keep the bar high, but also demand results?
It's really hard, right? I think that um, in many ways, it's important that I make all of my decisions and all of the advice that I give is deeply aligned with my values. Um, because I need to be unwavering when it comes to the expectation while simultaneously um, expressing deep belief in their ability to lead excellent schools.
Yeah.
And that can be especially challenging when I walk into a building and it's not yet excellent. Right. And so, this balance of like affirming these are the things that are going really well, these are the things that you are winning on, is super important, and helping them get really clear like this is the one thing you are going to win on tomorrow,
Yeah.
that's going to lead you to win on this thing next week, that will lead you to win on this thing next month, and lead you to win on this thing next year, right? Because I think that one of the most challenging things, especially running a building during a pandemic, is that it feels overwhelming.
Hmm.
It feels like you are doing it by yourself. It feels like you don't know what to prioritize. And from my perspective, as their support team, that is how I support them, getting them really, really clear on what to go after, the nuances of making really difficult decisions while always making sure that we're putting kids first.
Yeah. And you've been on the receiving end of being part of a cohort where you had a school manager. Now you were a school manager yourself. If you were to
Yeah.
reimagine what it looks like to manage a cohort of schools really excellently, what would that look like?
Oh, man. I think there's like a balance. The goal for me is to have a balance of soliciting input,
Yeah.
right? Making sure that people feel like their voices are being heard, being really clear around times when that input or feedback can't be put into place, and sharing clear rationale about why, right? It's not just because I said so.
Yeah.
It's like we were really thoughtful. We've imagined, we've thought through these things, and this is why we've made the decision. And being really clear with them about why we have made the decision we have made. We are going with this feedback, and this is why. We are not going with this feedback, and this is why. Because that was one of the things that was most challenging for me when I like really disagreed with the decision that was being made on the network level, and it felt like no one was listening.
Mm.
And we're working so hard on campuses to provide excellent instruction for children. Um, and so I think that's something that's one piece that I hopefully will be helpful.
Yeah. And as your leaders give you feedback, and as you mentioned, here's where we're going with this feedback, and here's why we're not. Many schools and networks, districts alike, are starting the planning process for next year. And they're
Mhm.
planning everything from training to instruction and all the in between. What advice would you have for those folks as they plan heading into next year?
Whew. So I think I'm going to say something that might be slightly controversial. So
Go
let's
for
see.
it.
Right. I think that 2020 brought a lot of fear into this work because no one wants to be seen as racist or doing anything that could be harmful to brown and black children or brown and black people. And of course, I'm aligned with that, right? I don't ever want to do anything that can be seen as disempowering. I think what has happened is that the pendulum has swung um, a bit too far in the direction of then not holding children to really high expectations. Because our children
Okay.
are excellent and our children are brilliant,
Yeah.
and they deserve excellent education, and they deserve to be pushed in ways that are loving and supportive, because we want them to be successful human beings. And so I think the thing that I think is controversial, maybe, is that I think having low expectations are racist. I think saying, oh, this, they come from this particular background, or their household is challenging, so therefore they can't sit up in class, or therefore they can't do this work, or therefore they, can't learn how to read like everyone else. I think that's a low expectation. And I think that that's actually more harmful to children than it is to actually work to meet their needs and create the conditions for them to be their best selves. And that's what I believe the work is. And
Yeah.
so if I had to think about planning for PD or any planning for the next school year, that would be my focus. Are we being as intentional as we need to be to create the conditions for all of our children to thrive, and be successful at our schools?
Yeah. And how do you incorporate that in day-to-day instruction, right? Because I think a lot of people are thinking about that. We know it can be incorporated pretty seamlessly, but if for folks who are trying to grapple with this, this or that mentality, right? I either go after social emotional learning or I don't. I either go after instruction or I don't. But we believe we can do all of them and do all of them well. Where does one start?
I think you have to get really clear on what you care about, and go after those things. So if what you care about is all children learning and being successful, right? Doing your best to get really clear on what are the 1 to 2 things that you are going to prioritize this year, because you can't go after everything, right?
You
And
know, we'd
this
like
idea
to.
of social,
Yeah.
I mean, you could
Even though
try,
we,
right?
even
But
though
you
we would
won't do
like
it with
to.
excellence. You can't do it excellence, right? So getting really clear as an organization on what your values are, right? Because every organization may have different values, is going after different things, but
Mhm.
getting clear and prioritizing the 1 to 2 things that you want to win on that year, and making sure that all of your decisions are aligned with that,
Yeah.
because it can get really muddled really quickly,
Yeah.
especially when you're listening, when you're trying to incorporate the feedback from various stakeholders.
Yeah. And I know you to be a very, again, it's unfair because I know you personally, but to be a very reflective person, what questions are you asking yourself lately?
It's interesting, and I'm going to try to answer your question as clearly as possible. It's interesting because the further away I get from the classroom, right? When I think about the schools that I want to be responsible for, the question is, would I send my children to this school?
Mhm.
And that's the thing that I keep very front of mind. Like, if this interaction was happening with my son, would I be okay with that? If I saw this eighth grade teacher teaching my eighth grader, would I be like, yes, this is excellent? Um, and that for me is sort of how I pressure test whether or not something meets the bar, right? Because this is somebody else's baby, and I want to make sure that they're getting the best, because that's what I would want for my own children.
Yeah. Yeah. What is one deeply held belief in your work that you will stick behind, and willing to challenge anyone about?
That I care more about kids than I do about the perception that other adults have of me.
Say more about that.
I learned early on as a principal that you cannot please everyone, and that you are often going to face opposition around decisions that you make,
Mhm.
especially if you are putting kids first all the time. And it can be tricky because you need adults to run schools, right? You need the adults in the
And
building.
there's such a staffing shortage now. People are rightfully worried about
Listen,
having adults in front of students, and so. But please go ahead.
yeah, the great resignation is real.
Yes.
And if what you are trying to do, from my perspective, and this is, I think that if what you are trying to do is righteous and is good for children, the people will come and they will want to be a part of your mission and be a part of really, really good work.
Absolutely.
Um, and I think it really depends on how you frame things, how you deliver messages, how you solicit feedback. All of that matters. It's less about the what and more so about whether or not people feel successful,
Mhm.
because that's what keeps people as part of a community.
Yeah. And my final question, a big one, what does it mean to be educated?
Whew, Lord. Um, what does it mean to be educated? One is a lifelong process. I believe in seeking knowledge from the cradle to the grave. I believe that to be educated is is a is a constant, something that's ever evolving, always existing. It is a verb, right? Because I hope that I'm more educated now than I was 10 years ago, and I hope 10 years from now I'm more educated than I am today.
Yeah.
Um, and so it feels like something that is ever happening, an ongoing process. Something that gives you access to so many things that you would not normally have access to if you were not educated. And I think that's relative for everyone.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, those are my initial thoughts.
That's a great answer. I mean, my I've learned a lot, even just over the years that I've known you about not so much the, as you mentioned, the adaptive and technical skills, right? I've always, and in our time working together, been focused so much on the technical, but you've really pushed me in the past to think about, well, the adaptive skills matter just as much as sort of technical skills do. And so this idea that you're constantly learning, I'm better now, right, today because of our interactions we've had in the past than I was 10 years ago, so to speak. And so I'm confident that our audience will also learn a great deal from your great work today. Thank you very much for being a part of this.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I
Of
appreciate it.
course. Thank you.